Hi everyone, a very good evening to all of you. My name is Ashna Sisodia and you are watching this video on Unacademy's YouTube channel, UPSC Articulate. In today's class, we are going to discuss why recently Russia has suspended New START treaty. This particular topic is important from gender studies point of view, paper 2, international relation. Apart from that, from PSR optional point of view, this is absolutely important for paper 2 section B of your optional. So let us start with our topic. Why are we talking about this? Recently, on 21st of Feb 2023, Russia has announced to suspend its participation in the New START treaty, which is the last remaining major military agreement with the United States. So, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced the suspension of Russia's participation in this New START treaty, which is a 2010 New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. What is the full form of New START treaty? It means New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. And this announcement, it came after months of Russian delays and cancellations to include inspections and consultative meetings. It also followed an announcement by the US State Department that Russia was in violation of New START treaty. So the suspension of this New START, it contributes to the demise of arms control, and it also eliminates one of the few remaining forums for dialogue between Russia and USA at a time of risking nuclear risk, rising nuclear risks. So suspending this New START is just the latest in a larger trend of Russia's increasing reliance on nuclear weapons. Vladimir Putin is telling the world who he is. He's, you know, by this attempting to use nuclear weapons to deter conventional Western support and intervention in Ukraine. His, you know, Western countries, Western media is saying that he's intentionally increasing nuclear risk, believing that NATO members have a lower risk tolerance than Moscow and do not care enough about the fate of Ukraine to escalate their involvement and the war. But regardless of this, these risks are real and growing, especially in the absence of a crisis communication channels. So let us first of all understand the background of this treaty. What is this New START treaty? The name START, it comes from the original Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which is also known as START 1. This was signed between the US and the erstwhile USSR in 1991 and came into force in 1994. But what about the New START? Well, I'll tell you more about that. Please remember that this START 1 treaty, it capped the number of nuclear warheads and intercontinental ballistic missiles that each side could deploy at 6,600 respectively, which lapsed in 2009, and this was further replaced first by the SALT, also known as the Treaty of Moscow, and then by the New START treaty. So New START treaty, this is signed by the then US President Barack Obama and his Russian counterpart. This was signed, New START was signed in 2010. The New START treaty, it caps the number of strategic nuclear warheads that the United States and Russia can deploy. And together, the US and Russia, they own 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. 90% of world's nuclear weapons today. So in this context, when I say deploy means ready for immediate use rather than having it in storage. So weapons that are kept in storage are non-deployed. But this treaty, New START treaty, this is all about a pact between former Cold War rivals which caps at 1550 the number of nuclear warheads that can be deployed by Russia and United States of America. Please remember the date. It came into force on 5th of February 2011, and it continues the bipartisan process of verifiably reducing US and Russian strategic nuclear arsenals by limiting both sides to 700 strategic launchers and 1550 operational warheads. So, which means under the agreement, Russia and US are committed to deploying no more than 1550 strategic nuclear warheads and a maximum of 700 long range missiles and bombers. Each site can conduct up to 18 inspections. 18 inspections of strategic nuclear weapon sites every year. This is all done to ensure that the other side has not breached the treaty's limits. So this treaty came into force in 2011. This was extended in 2021 for 5 more years after Joe Biden took office. Inspections under the agreement were put on hold in 2020 because of the pandemic, corona, and talks between US and Russia on resuming inspections were due. They were due to take place in November last year in Egypt, but Russia postponed them. And since then, neither side has set a new date. So this new START treaty, the duration of this was 10 years, that is till 2021, but it was extended by 5 more years, that is till 2026. So all in all, we can say this is a bilateral agreement or a bilateral treaty between US and Russia that was signed in 2010 and it came into force in 2011. So the treaty aimed to limit the number of deployed strategic nuclear warheads and delivery systems held by each country. So this New START treaty, it was designed to promote transparency and predictability in the strategic nuclear arsenals of both US and Russia. Under the terms of the treaty, each side was limited to a maximum of 1550 strategic nuclear warheads. The treaty included a number of measures to verify compliance, which included on-site inspections, which included the exchange of data on the status and the location of nuclear weapons and delivery systems. This increased transparency was designed to build confidence and trust between the two nations and reduce the risk of a nuclear arms race. It was negotiated during a period when there was a strained relationship between both the countries. So this treaty used to be seen as a symbol of progress in US-Russian relations and a signal that both nations were committed to reducing the threat of nuclear war. The treaty was also welcomed by the international community, with many countries expressing support for its goals and objectives. So it was seen as a success. This treaty has resulted in reduction of US and Russian strategic nuclear arsenals by more than 85% since the peak of Cold War. There used to be a time when there were 70,000 nuclear weapons in the world. So this treaty helped to maintain a stability and predictability in the strategic nuclear balance between the two countries. However, it faced criticism from some quarters, for some analysts have argued that this treaty does not go far enough in reducing nuclear weapons and that it should have included limits on non strategic nuclear weapons as well. There are people, those who have raised concerns about the verification measures included in this treaty. They have given this argument that they may not be sufficient to detect violations. So, as of now, the future of the New START treaty is uncertain, even though this treaty was extended until 2026. But what has happened recently, Russia has now suspended it. So, the deterioration of US Russia relations in recent years has made it more difficult to reach agreement on issues related to specifically nuclear arms control. What are the various other treaties signed between US and Russia? So there is SALT Treaty, Strategic Arms Limitation Talks 1 Treaty. Now this began in 1969 under the interim agreement where both the sides pledged not to construct new ICBMs, not to increase the size of existing ICBM silos significantly, and also this treaty capped the number of submarine launched ballistic missile launch tubes and submarine launched ballistic missile carrying submarines. Then there is another treaty, the START 1, which was signed in 1991, which I've already discussed. Then comes the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty number 2, which was signed in 1993, called for reducing deployed strategic arsenals to 3,000 to 3,500 warheads, and this banned the deployment of destabilizing multiple warhead land-based missiles. Then we have SALT, the Strategic Offensive Reduction Treaty, which was signed in 2004, under which the United States and Russia reduced their strategic arsenals to 1,700 to 2,200 warheads each. Then we have START, that is signed in 2010, also called as New START. This was limited to 1,550 this time. So these are the all agreements, US-Russian strategic arms control agreements that they have signed. So it was in 1972 ABM treaty was signed. What is ABM? ABM is Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. ABM treaty was a bilateral arms control agreement which they have signed in 1972. The treaty was designed to limit the deployment of anti-ballistic missile systems which were seen as destabilizing, and it could potentially lead to a new arms race. So under this treaty, US and Soviet Union agreed that they will limit the deployment of anti-ballistic missiles to one site each, with no more than 100 interceptor missiles at each site. So this was a key component of the broader nuclear arms control regime during the Cold War. Then in 1998, INF Treaty was signed, which expired in 2019. What is INF? INF Treaty is the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. This was a bilateral arms control agreement that was signed between US and Soviet Union. This treaty was designed to eliminate all ground-launched missiles, those who are having ranges between 500 to 5,500 kilometers. So, under this INF treaty, both sides agreed to eliminate all their ground launched ballistic and cruise missiles. Also, it included provisions related to on site inspections and verification measures to ensure compliance. Again, this was seen as a major breakthrough in arms control. Why? Because it was the first agreement to eliminate an entire class of nuclear weapons. So, this treaty was also seen as an important step towards reducing tensions between the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Then we have START 1 treaty, which expired in 2009. First, there was SALT, and then there was New START, which expired in 2021. Now, the question is, what are the implications of the suspension? A suspension of this New START treaty, it means that it will be now harder for the US to monitor compliance. Another implication is, since Russia has already suspended mutual inspections of nuclear weapon sites and participation in a bilateral consultative commission, it would be a serious blow if Putin went further and stopped routine reporting and data exchange on nuclear weapon movements and other related developments. So, this move is entirely symbolic, and most probably Russia made the announcement just to pressure US into approaching Russia about ending the war. So, Russia can dictate the terms under which that would happen. So, these are the implications of the suspension. So, what could be the reasons behind it? Well, New START treaty, this requires United States and Russia to hold 18 on-site inspections every year. On-site inspections every year. And as of January this year, the United States and Russia had conducted 328 inspections under the treaty. Now, these inspections were put on hold during the pandemic, but as international travel resumed, Russia continued to stall on restarting inspections. Last year, in August 2022, Russia paused inspections under New START, claiming the United States attempted to conduct an inspection without prior notice, and that the existing realities with the treaty created unilateral advantages for the United States. So, in late 2022, Russia announced that it would postpone participation in the bilateral consultative committee. And last month, in January 2023, the State Department report, it concluded in refusing to permit the United States to conduct inspection activities on Russian territory based on an invalid invocation of the temporary exemption provision. So, Russia has failed to comply with its obligation to facilitate US inspection activities. Russia has denied the United States its right to conduct such inspection activities. Obviously, there are short term and long term reasons for why Russia suspended participation in New START treaty. In the short term, we can say that Russia was likely hoping to use New START as leverage against the United States to convince Washington to stop supplying military aid to Ukraine. And the longer term reasons are that Putin is relying on, Russia's strategic arsenal to backstop regional ambitions, and Putin is using arms control as another means of trying to shift blame to the West for the worsening geopolitical environment. And Russia has been quick to accuse US of undermining New START. As per a senior Russian diplomat and New START negotiator, as per him, he says that they have warned that the control arms control cannot be isolated from geopolitical realities, and in the current circumstances they consider it unjustified, untimely, and inappropriate to invite the US military to their strategic facilities. So, abandoning arms control is a part of Putin's modus operandi. Russia also suspended participation in the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty in 2007 and in 2014 that was found to be in non compliance with the Intermediate Range Nuclear Force Treaty. So, last year Russia suspended the inspections. Why? Because, as per Russia, it is difficult to carry out inspections on American soil due to Western sanctions, including the closure of airspace for Russian planes and visa restrictions. Another reason they have pointed out is the new spike in the coronavirus cases in US last year. Now, what do you think? Will the United States stay in New START? Well, in an immediate response to Russia's suspension of this treaty, the Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he explained that they will continue to act responsibly in this area, and it is also something the rest of the world expects from them, which means that the US will continue to abide by the New START limits and pursue arms control and other risk reduction measures even without a willing partner in Russia. Maintaining this course is definitely going to be a challenge because, on the one hand, the administration committed to a renewed emphasis on arms control. They, on one hand, they talked about non proliferation and risk reduction to strengthen stability and signal their desire to reduce the salience of nuclear weapons globally. But on the other hand, in the face of expanding Russian and Chinese nuclear arsenals and the absence of arms control, the Biden administration will likely face growing internal pressure to break out of New START treaty and expand its arsenal. This pressure may be justified by forthcoming nuclear guidance from the Pentagon and thinking within the administration about how to deter these two competitors. Now, how will Russia's suspension impact the war in Ukraine? Russia will expand its strategic arsenal and break out of New START limits. So, at present, Russia needs drones and personnel more than it needs nuclear warheads. But its missile production includes dual capable systems such as this cruise missile. So, while these missiles would not have been covered under New START, they show that Russia has open missile production lines and remains capable of expanding its strategic arsenal despite Western sanctions and the ongoing war. So, this announcement by the president of Russia, it shows Russia is doubling down on nuclear bullying in the war in Ukraine. Another impact can be that arms control is part of Russia's wider disinformation campaign to portray the United States and NATO as the aggressors in Ukraine. Like, for example, Russian foreign minister states that, he has accused the United States of cancelling planned strategic stability talks for November 2022 in Egypt. However, according to a press release, by the members of Congress, the US delegation showed up for the meeting, whereas Russia cancelled it at the last minute. So it will be important for the US and the NATO to continue to provide evidence challenging Russian disinformation, lest it undermine alliance unity and support for Ukraine. And finally, suspending this new start essentially silences one of the few remaining forums for dialogue between US and Russia. The war in Ukraine has increased awareness of the risk of nuclear use and the need for crisis communication channels. There has been one question on this topic that has been asked in 2011. The question was that the New START treaty was in news. What is the treaty? What is this treaty? So these options are given, and now that we have discussed it, you should know that the answer is A. It is a bilateral strategic nuclear arms reduction treaty between US and the Russian Federation. Now that we have discussed this, the bigger question is, like from UPSC perspective, how India gets impacted by it. Well, it could have an impact on this development, could have an impact on India's security and strategic interest. Because this is a bilateral arms control agreement between US and Russia, it places limits on the number of deployed strategic nuclear warheads and delivery systems. So this treaty is seen as a key pillar of nuclear global disarmament efforts, as this reduces the risk of nuclear conflict as it creates a more stable international security environment. So now that Russia has announced to suspend it, I think it could lead to a new arms race between the US and Russia, which could have a destabilizing effect on the global security environment. And this could have direct implications for India's security. Why? Because India is located in a region that is already facing a range of security challenges, which includes terrorism, insurgency, and geopolitical rivalries. In addition, the modernization of nuclear weapons by both US and Russia could have implications for India's nuclear deterrence capabilities. You must know that India has a policy of minimum credible deterrence, which means that India maintains a nuclear arsenal that is only sufficient to deter potential adversaries from attacking India. However, the modernization of nuclear weapons by major powers, it could undermine India's deterrence capabilities, and it can create a new security challenges for the country. Furthermore, a new arms race between US and Russia could divert resources away from other global challenges, like we are facing climate change, economic development related challenges. So this could have indirect implications for India's economic and social development as the country is closely integrated into the global economy. The country relies on a stable international security environment to pursue its strategic interest. So this suspension from the treaty could have implications for India's security and strategic interest. India, as a key player in the international security environment, should continue to engage with major powers and work towards a more stable and peaceful global security environment. And what about China then? What about China? How China is affected by it? See, the suspension of this has implications for China. See, even though China is not a party to the treaty, as the US and Russia have the two largest nuclear arsenals in the world, this treaty was seen as an important step towards reducing the a risk of a nuclear arms race between these two countries. And this treaty used to place a limit on the number of deployed strategic nuclear weapons that each side would have. This helped to reduce tensions and increase stability. And without this treaty in place, there is a risk that both the Russia and US will feel less constrained in their nuclear arsenals, which could lead to an increase in nuclear weapons development and deployment. And this could potentially affect China's strategic calculus, as China has a nuclear arsenal and China is a regional player in Asia. Sorry. So China has been long wary of the US and its military presence in the region, and the suspension of this treaty could increase China's concerns about US strategic intentions. So, if the US and Russia are no longer bound by the limits of this treaty, China may feel pressure to increase its own nuclear arsenal as a means of deterrence. Furthermore, the suspension of this treaty could lead to a more unstable global security environment, which could have economic and diplomatic implications for China as well. So, China is a major global power and has interest in maintaining stability and peaceful relations with other countries. The suspension could increase the risk of nuclear conflict, which would be detrimental to China's interest. So, as per the latest data, as per the SIPRI report, uh, in total of 13,000 something approximately nuclear warheads are there in the world, which are held by 9 countries. And you should be aware about the name of these 9 countries, because the possession and potential use of nuclear weapons, that is, it remains a major global security concern. So, this is it for this session. Thank you very much. If you're planning to take an Academy subscription, best offers are available right now. Today is the last date where you can get 30% off on your subscription, and there's a 6 months extension along with it. If you're planning for any subscription above 1 year, there are subscriptions available for 1 year, 2 year, and 3 year. You can use my code Ashna Sisodia to get these great discount. This is it for this session, guys. Thank you very much. Bye bye. Take care.